Welcome back to the How to Podcast series. Glad to have everyone here. Now, you've probably heard of a song many years ago, a long time ago, Jonnie Be Good. Well, how about Jonnie Be Great? Jonnie is here on the podcast, and he's a great guest, a great person. He's got a great mission in life, and he's here to serve you as a listener as he serves his community as well. Jonnie is also a Canadian, which makes me happy because I'm a Canadian. So we're going to talk a little bit about Canadian podcasting and so much more. Jonnie, welcome to the How to Podcast series as my guest co-host. Glad to have you here.
Oh, thanks for having me, Dave. And yeah, I'm wearing the official Canadian tuxedo, my lumberjack shirt. So
there you go.
Yeah, it's awesome to be here.
Awesome. So we're both in Ontario. What part of Ontario are you in, Jonnie, for people listening?
Up in the Northwest.
Northwest. There you go. Yeah, and I'm down in Niagara, so we're not too far apart.
No.
But yeah.
Based on the size of Canada, we're literally neighbors.
Right. Ontario is a big province. If you don't know, go look at your map. It's huge. Yeah. So, but yeah, glad to have you here, John.
Yeah.
Tell us about your show.
So I host and produce Refuge Freedom Stories. I'm blessed to do that. It's a show that talks about how people's lives have been changed by the power of God. We have about 180 something episodes online right now on all the major platforms and listening audience in about 78 countries. So it's amazing how those opportunities have grown and created. And there are some really, really inspiring stories there. Whether your listeners are believers in God or not, I would encourage them to check out some of the shows. We've interviewed everybody from crack addicts to Major League Baseball managers that won the World Series, lots of veterans, lots of musicians, a few parents that have lost their kids through tragic accidents, a lady that came out of human trafficking, other ladies who work against human trafficking. It's a wide variety of different people that have shared their intimate stories and just how it just shows how God is relational to each of us individually. So very inspiring. It's only half an hour long. The interview part is usually about 20 to 25 minutes, and then I end each show with a song. So
nice. So you're a musician as well. I saw a picture of you online with a guitar. So there.
I've done a little bit of singing in church and on some outdoor events and written a few songs and things like that. I actually had one guy on who was a contestant in American Idol. And so I sent him lyrics to one of the songs I wrote, and he sent me back like a demo soundtrack of it, a very preliminary first cut. It was amazing. So nice. Yeah, it's kind of, I don't know if anything will ever come from that, but it was sure nice to hear some music set to it.
There you go. I love it. I love creative people. I'm a musician as well, so we have that in common. That's good. I'm curious, Jonnie, how did podcasting find you? Most people ask the question, how did you find podcasting? But I like it the other way. How did podcasting find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So in 2020, a good friend of mine, I've known him for 30 years. His name's Reverend Alan Campbell. And he runs a ministry called Refuge Ministries Canada. You can find it online. So when Alan was growing up as a young teenager, he ended up on the streets in Toronto and ended up, dealing drugs and things like that. And a drug deal went bad and he ended up in prison. So when he was in prison, he had some Salvation Army workers come in to share the gospel with him. And after they left, he was thinking about it, and the Lord actually came to him and said, "Are you tired of living your life the way that you're living it?" And he said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "Okay, well, let's do this," type of thing. And so he gave his life to Christ. When he got out, he was asked to go to a youth detention center in Alberta to share his story. And when he did, a young man came up to him who was 12 years old and said, "Oh, well, my heroes are Jeffrey Dahmer and Charles Manson." And he said, "Well," he says, "my hero is Jesus Christ." And he led this young man to the Lord. When he was flying back, he realized that there was nobody there to mentor that young man. So he started Refuge Ministries Canada. It's like a first point of contact for young offenders or adults who have been in detention. And when they get out, a lot of times they have nowhere to go. So he runs this ministry. He'll get calls all the time and say, "Hey, this guy's getting out on Tuesday. Can you help him? We don't have anywhere for him." So they have 5 houses that they rent, and they put them up for 6 months if something's available. Give them, good Bible teaching, no drugs, no alcohol there, that kind of stuff. Help them find work and so on, and break that cycle from their previous life, because you need that.
Yeah.
And so he called me up in 2020 and he said, hey, Jonnie, I heard that 77% of Canadians believe in miracles. Just read it in a survey. And I said, well, that's awesome. And he said, I think we should do a radio show because we've seen lots of miracles through the ministry. And I said, well, yeah, that's great. I said, I'm a technical, geeky kind of guy. I can help you with the technical side, maybe. You know, I fooled around with GarageBand and stuff like that. And I could probably help you with that. But I don't have a radio show voice. You're going to have to find somebody else. And he said, okay. So the next day, another guy called him up, and Dave, who was the original host of the show, he does have a God-given radio voice. Like it's that deep, resonant, you know, sounding voice that you just want to listen to all day, right? And it really stirs you. And his brother actually was one of the founding members of the Cowboy Junkies. And his brother, unfortunately, succumbed to an overdose from the fame and fortune and that lifestyle, right? So Dave called up Alan and said, hey, I like what you're doing with your ministry. Is there anything you need? And Alan said, yeah, I need a radio show host. So off we went. We started producing these radio shows, and they're on radio stations across Canada, half-hour show. And then a couple months later, my pastor came to me and said, hey, I've been listening to the radio show. Do you have a podcast? And I had this big, gigantic light bulb moment over my head. And I said, no, but I'm going to. And I knew nothing about podcasting, absolutely zero. And so off we went, found a platform to host it on, started, you know, transporting the radio program over to a podcast format and just kind of learned along the way.
Amazing. So I'm going to challenge you, Jonnie. I think you got a great voice for podcasting.
Oh, wow.
I think I love it. So I'm hooked just by listening to you on the show, just so you know. So that's a beautiful thing about podcasting. I deal with a lot of people, Jonnie, starting out, and they wrestle with the sound of their own voice because they've never heard it recorded.
Yes.
And it sounds different outside of our body than what it sounds like internally.
Absolutely, it does. Absolutely.
Right? So, Jonnie, if you, based on your knowledge and all of the things you've done in the past, if somebody came to you, Jonnie, and said, Jonnie, I hate the sound of my own voice. I'm not going to be a podcaster for that simple reason. I have a message. I have something I could change the world with, a story, but just the sound of my voice is keeping me from podcasting. What would you say to them?
I would say go with the passion that's in your heart, because if you have something to say, it's there for a reason, and God will make a way for you.
Yeah. I challenge people that the only person who can do your show is you.
I agree.
I can't reach your audience. I can't be you. I haven't lived your life. I haven't read the books you've read, studied, met the people you've met. I don't have that circle of friends. You're the only person who can do your show is you. So if you don't do your show, then the people that you could reach won't be reached in the same way. So I always encourage people, try it, get out there. You will improve over time. You'll get more comfortable. You'll relax a little bit more. You won't be so tense when you present on the microphone, but just start, and then just repetition, practice, just keep doing it. And over time, you're going to find your voice in podcasting. It's probably not going to happen in the first 5 episodes, but over time, your voice will develop, and the true you is going to come out through the microphone. So
I think
get out there and start.
That's very true. And as you said, you get more comfortable with it. And you also have to realize, if you've ever done public speaking or something like that, they tell you, well, just look at people in the room as something other than what you actually see, type of thing. Mm-hmm. And I think it's the same with podcasting. You've got that passion in your heart, that specific focus that you need to have for a podcast, because you can't be trying to boil the ocean, doing everything at once, right? You gotta be focused. And so when you're focused on that kind of drives you to do your research and research your guests and look up supporting material to tell the story or reference the event or whatever it is that your podcast is about. And nobody, as you said, nobody else can do that other than you, because they don't have the same passion as you. There's a lot of similar type podcasts to whatever your podcast is or is going to be, but you as an individual will make that unique. And your spin on it is always different than, you could take two people, you and I could sit down in a room and they could give us a book and say, okay, I want you to read this first chapter and tell us what you saw. And we're going to be maybe similar on a few things, but everybody is going to look at it uniquely in their own way.
Right. Because you're filtering it through who you are.
Exactly.
Everything gets filtered through you. So that makes it different, unique, it's special. And like I said, no one else can do what you can do. So my challenge to anybody who's thinking about starting a podcast is to be bold enough to try and then get feedback, like ask people for advice, learn, get better, and then also find out what good means to you. What does it sound like? What does good look like? What does it sound like? And then use that as a guide, not like you want to become that person, but it gives you something to work towards. I love how Jonnie does his show. So I like this element of Jonnie's show and I like this element. So I'm going to bring those elements into what I do, try to replicate them to my ability. But I really admire this person. I like Dave's show. I like Jonnie's show. And bring those pieces together. And that's going to help you formulate what good looks like to you. That's one of my questions I ask everybody that comes to me when they're thinking about starting a show. I say to them, okay, what does good artwork look like for your show? What do you like when you learn on your phone and you're scrolling through all of these podcasts and something catches your eye? What is it? Stop and go, why do you like that image? That's a good sign for you. And when you listen to a show, what do you like? Do you like long intros, short intros? Do you like when the host gets right to the content? Do you like a little banter? Do you like stories? What are these things that you like? What resonates with you? And that'll help you shape your show. So define what good looks like and sounds like for you. It's really going to help you guide you as you develop your show.
And I think it's really important too, is that you try to embrace excellence. You want to be the best that you can possibly be. Everybody starts out at the baseline. You start out with your laptop or you start out with your desktop computer, maybe, earbuds or something like, you know what I mean? And as you listen to shows that kind of speak to you about, wow, like I really like what they did or something, it's worth investigating, maybe contacting that podcast and say, hey, what are you using for equipment? I went to PodFest last year, and one of the sessions talked about investing in your show. And so I took that to move forward with a editing program for recording and editing and so on. So, I made that subscription, and yeah, it's not cheap, but I mean, it's worth it to me. And it has made the editing a lot simpler. I use Riverside, for example. Mm-hmm. So I started with that, and then, I got a mic. Like I have a Blue Yeti right here, but it's not my first mic. My first mic was a Samsung G-Track Pro. And, I used that, and yet I found that it's an awesome mic, but yet it sounded a little bit tinny for what I wanted. So I moved to the Yeti, and this won't be my last mic because I'm going to move over to a Shure sometime in the near future, I hope, just because, as I talk with people and we've had these conversations, they've had the Shure mic, like it's maybe not the specific one they have, but the sound quality was just like the next step up. And I think we always have to pursue that excellence. And the other thing is, like, once you find that you've reached that level of excellence, it's very hard to stay there because it's easier to get to the top than it is to stay at the top, because you could have the slightest error and it'll knock you off that level, so excellence is something that you should really try to pursue each time you sit down to the computer, whether it's scheduling, whether it's the guests that you bring on the show, whether it's the distribution that you have, the equipment that you're using, the programs you're using. Take a good hard look at all of those areas and say, okay, yes, these have all been working for me, but are any of them, lacking? Is there any of them that I can improve on? And find a way to do that, and your show would definitely benefit.
Yeah. One thing that you talked to me about is the whole podcasting community. You talk about going down to events in the U.S., which is great. We just had an event in September this year in Calgary, which was great. It was Pod Summit. My wife and I went out to that. That was an amazing few days there in Calgary, talking to fellow Canadian podcasters. And there's also events happening in Toronto, close to where we are. For you, why is it important for you to connect with other podcasters, Jonnie? Why is that something that you add to your calendar?
I think it's really important because, as you said, everybody has their own unique experiences, how they came into podcasting, what drives them, We talked about like the equipment and things like that they use. And I think it's really important to have those connections and to talk to other podcasters because we don't want to be an island unto ourselves. There's a huge community out there of experience and passion and vision and challenge, all of those things that can help us improve. And just the connections that you make, like the connection you and I have made, it's great. It's awesome.
Yeah.
And as we continue to meet other podcasters, you just never know the kind of connection that you're going to make with those people. One might be really just casual. Hey, it's great to meet you. I see you're Canadian, or you're from Nigeria, or whatever it might be, right? And that's great all in itself. But there are sometimes connections that you make with other podcasters that develop into a long-term friendship. And I think that's really important because podcasting can be challenging, especially, if you have a family, or you're working full time and you've got a job as well as trying to fit podcasting into it all. And you need that support. There's times when you need to reach out to somebody in the community and say, hey, can you help me with this? Or, hey, what do you do about this? Or hey, I've had guests that are, committing to come on the show and yet they've been canceling. Have you ever gone through that? And so the community is really important. And I think it's worthwhile to invest in that.
I think as podcasters, we want to build a community around our podcast. We want our listeners to talk to each other, to talk to us. And we're really asking people to follow us and interact with us, send us emails, do all those things. But then I don't really hear podcasters talking about creating community within podcasting with other podcasters. It's like we are at the top of the mountain on our own by ourselves, trying to build a community around us. But we, as podcasters, I think, need to build community with each other. The one thing I notice from talking to listeners of podcasts, some of them come to podcasting for companionship. They just love the voice of their favorite podcaster. They love the fact that they have this consistent stream of content coming from somebody they look up to for whatever reason. They really admire the podcast they listen to, and they feel like they're in community and they're having companionship with somebody they've never met in real life. They just love listening to podcasts. And there's a feeling of loneliness and a lack of companionship from a listener perspective. And they come to podcasting for that. I had one listener reach out to me. It's very weird because the person said to me, Dave, I have to admit, I listened to your show. And I'm like, well, this is weird. Where are we going with this admission here? I listen to your show, but I don't listen to your show for what you talk about. I listen to your show because of who you are. He said, you could talk about anything. You could talk about anything at all, and I would listen to your show because of who you are. So I'm not listening to the content. I'm listening to you. And I've kind of put you into my week. You're part of my week now. And I'm thinking, man, all the work I do to create content, do my research, do all this prep, record the episode, and this person's coming for none of that, Jonnie. They're not interested in anything that I'm saying, just the fact that I'm here. And they build a world around that relationship with me. I think in the same way, we as podcasters need to build relationships with each other as fellow podcasters so that we're not feeling so alone. Just like a listener feels alone, we as a podcaster should not feel alone in this space. So doing things like this, having you on my screen, now I have Jonnie in my brain. When I listen to your show, I can see your face now because we've met. So I have a connection with you as a listener of your shows that makes things even stronger for me. So I think as podcasters, we need to be a little more open to either through conferences, meetups, whatever. We need to build this community within our own podcasting community. I think it's going to help us podcast longer and not feel so alone. Do you ever have that moment where you're like, is anybody even listening to this show?
Well, before we get to that, there's a few things you touched on that I want to talk about. So the listener that talked to you about, you could talk about any subject you want. They're going to listen because they recognize that integrity in you, your passion for the work, your excellence, and all that kind of stuff. And I think integrity is something that is so critical to being successful, quote unquote, in the podcasting world, because if you're not genuine, if you're not heartfelt, involved with what it is that you're presenting to the world, people are going to know that. We've seen that in an election in another country where the one candidate was just deemed to be continually, not dishonest is the word I would use, but not genuine. And that's something that we need to really understand as well. Yes, we need to be ourselves. Don't try and put on somebody else's persona. Be yourself, because only you can deliver what's in your heart because you're passionate about it. So have that integrity to be yourself and present it as honestly and as professionally as you can, because that will resonate with the listeners, as you've said. As far as podcast community goes, there are some online groups that allow for that podcast community to be built, and you can build those relationships like online. PodMatch community, for example, is a great place. We're on there, and there's all kinds of podcasters around the world. PodMatch, the platform itself, is awesome. If your listeners or your viewers don't know about it, it allows you as a host or a guest to connect with others through an algorithm that matches your criteria with what they want to talk about, and vice versa. And it's a great platform. I've been on it from pretty much the start in 2020. So that really helped to build. Build the audience and the connections of that community.
Good. Are you on PodMatch for both as a host and a guest,
yes,
or just one or the other?
Both. Okay. You have a choice when you sign up. You can be one or the other or both. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm on right now as a host of a show, and it's only for me, I think, something like $6 a month, which is like very small amount of money. But I've already made amazing connections through PodMatch. Alex Sanfilippo's been on my show as a guest. He's an amazing human being. I just love everything about Alex and how he shows up in this world. There's nothing fake about this man.
No.
There's nothing fake. He's just true Alex. I just love having him on the show.
Yeah, I met him and his wife Alicia in Orlando last January, and they are genuine people for sure. Now, if you sign up for the what they used to have is a basic plan. It used to be free, but now it's a subscribed service. But when you sign up, there's also a component to PodMatch that your people that are thinking about starting podcasting, you have to have a certain number of shows actually, online before you can join, because you talked about it earlier, the number of podcasters that fade out or kind of don't stay diligent enough to get, the shows out there. The statistic of podcasters dropping out is very, very high. There's I'm just going to throw a number out there. Let's say 100,000 podcasts in the world. Let's say 100,000. There's only 2% of those that are actually regularly producing content. A few people get all excited about, I'm going to go podcasting, man. I got something to say. And they get like 4 or 5 episodes in, and then they just go, it's too much work, or life gets busy, So if you're going to jump into the podcasting pond, you need to be prepared to go for the long haul, and you will see the rewards of that, whether it's through like conversations you have with your listeners, or if you're a big statistics metrics type person, those will grow and so on. But PodMatch itself, they have a really great aspect to it, is that they have a commission-based part to it, where you get a small commission for each of the guests that you interview. And that commission is based on that guest's ranking in the platform and so on. And typically it's enough to cover the cost of the monthly subscription.
Yeah.
So
I like that.
Yeah. Well, they're giving back to the community, and they recognize the hard work that podcasters put in. So why not give back to the community?
Yeah, and if you're wanting more from Alex Sanfilippo and his team, Podcasting Made Simple is his podcast. It's amazing.
Yep.
Great podcasters on there. I love what he does for the community. So definitely go check that out. The one thing I want to jump back to, Jonnie, you talked about the word integrity.
Yes.
So I have a definition of integrity that I've used many times in the past, but I'm curious, before I talk about mine, I'd like to hear yours. What is your definition, the Jonnie definition of integrity? What does that mean?
So, being a Christian guy, for me, integrity means that I'm walking my life to the best of my ability to reflect Christ in everything I do. And because of that, I adhere to biblical principles. I adhere to the way Christ lived his life. And so integrity for me, is being as a podcast host in that aspect, is to be someone that's honest with my listeners, um, listen very carefully to the guests when they're on the show, because a guest coming on the show is taking time out of their schedule. They've got a story to tell, and you need to recognize that, and you need to also respect that, because they're willing to come and share their story on your show, on your podcast, and you need to give them time to tell people about it. So I think integrity really is a matter of respect for your guests and for your listeners. So for your guests, you want them to have the platform to use to tell their story. For your guests, you want to respect them enough to produce the best possible content with the best level of excellence that you can. And then as a host, your integrity is based on everything you do and the reason you do it, right? My driving force, as I said, is God. So I'm working for him. So of course I'm going to do that to the best of my ability. And I think those are components of integrity that are important to me.
Yeah. So I have a definition of integrity that says integrity means that you are the same all the way through.
Correct.
There's nothing fake about you. So if we use an example of cheap made furniture, that furniture that's got a veneer.
Yeah.
But if you took a look at the side of it, it's basically glue and sawdust with a nice cover on it, right? So if you move more than once, that furniture is going to fall apart as you move from one place to the next. It's not going to last a long time. Compare that to a tree that you cut down, and you look at the tree cut down. The tree is a tree all the way through, from the outside bark right to the center. It's all tree. That's got integrity. Mm-hmm. So a tree is integrity, and a piece of cheap furniture has no integrity. So as a human being, I think we need to be more tree and less fake furniture. It looks good on the outside, but inside it's just sawdust and glue. I think we as people need to be that person of integrity, so that it doesn't matter where you meet us. We're not perfect people by any means, but we are the same all the way through. There's nothing fake about our podcast, nothing fake about how we show up in this world, how we treat people, any of those things. Those are all fake elements of who we are, or we can be. And I want to tell everyone, integrity just means simply you're the same all the way through.
Absolutely.
That's kind of my definition of integrity.
Absolutely. And, you hear people say all the time about Keanu Reeves, Canadian guy.
Oh, yeah.
I'd say he's a genuine guy, the same guy that you see on the movie screen making millions doing all these cool movies. He's just a genuine everyday guy. And,
Right.
and that you're right. That is so important. We need to be consistent in everything that we do. 100%. And as far as trees go, like I'm getting more rings every year. So
there you go. Yeah. I like it. Yeah, the one thing too is I just love how, like, when we talk about Keanu Reeves, how he will like move off a subway seat to leave room for somebody. Like, here's a person who has money, fame, fortune, notoriety. People know who he is. But at the same time, he's just a guy on the train who will move out of the way. If Jonnie needs to sit down, he'll move gladly and give you his seat. Like, that's something special about that. There's something that's not fake. And I think as listeners listening to a podcast, if you're a fake person, hey, everybody, and you sound like a salesperson for a car, used sales car person and stuff, you can tell when some people are putting on a show and it's not really them. And as a listener, they're going to pick up on that and go, there's something off about how Jonnie's showing up to this. I don't feel like he's really real. And then you listen to another show and you're like, oh my gosh, I just love this person, right? Mm-hmm. True, genuine integrity is going to come through your microphone as well.
I think so. And it goes back to what you were just talking about presenting that persona. You see it all the time in newscasters. They've got their today, well, come on, like just be yourself, right? And I think, there are some that do, but we need to avoid that. We need to, as you said, just be ourselves, because, the voice that each of us have is unique, and that in itself kind of creates a brand, if you want to call it that, for the particular podcast that you're hosting.
So it's one thing to start a show, Jonnie. It's another thing to continue podcasting. But the third part is getting better at podcasting. So I'm always on this mission of being like 1% better every episode. I just want this episode to be a little bit better than the last one. And I'm always on that growth chart, trying to move my way up. So for you, what are you doing to learn more about podcasting, to get better at your craft so that you're improving over time? What are some of the things that you're doing and how are you learning how to podcast better?
Yeah, part of it is the software platform that I use to edit. Like I said, I moved from Zoom to Riverside, and it's new to me. I've only been using it for a couple of months, but it definitely has a lot of really cool things that you can do with it. I love the fact that you can edit a show like a Word document, because it creates a transcript and you delete a whole sentence and it disappears from the audio and from the video. It's great. So that's, I think, improving, because it takes a long time. Like, I mean, recording an episode, that's just the time that it takes to record it, whether it's a half hour or an hour or whatever it might be. But it's the editing afterwards that can consume you for days. So it's really important that we find ways to improve our process of editing, but maintaining the excellence that we want to present and achieve. And then also scheduling. There was a time where, back in 2021, between January and June, I had 105 interviews booked. And it was like, how am I going to manage this, working full time and family and all the other commitments, and like it was like 4 or 5 interviews a week plus all the editing to each of those shows. And I said, I can't do this. So I prayed about it, and I felt like I was to lay it all down. So I emailed all of my guests and I canceled every single interview, and I told them why. And I said, I'm just going to take a break from this until I figure out what to do. And then I opened up 2 spots a week and let them know, and it filled right up again. It was like, wow, like, okay, so now I've reduced it down to a few a month, and I'm finding that that's really helped me to do a better job, because I can spend more time actually working on the show. I'm pretty proficient at the editing now. I don't do it all in Riverside. I started with GarageBand for the audio, and our podcast is only audio based. So I'll use Riverside to do my main text-based editing to get the final structure of the interview. And then I'll actually export it to audio and take that into GarageBand and still do my editing in GarageBand. It's kind of weird, but I haven't made that leap yet to go completely over to Riverside. I will at some point, but I need to invest more time into learning about what it can do and how to do those things that I want to do with it. So there's that. And then also just like the publishing and everything, there's ways that you can improve your publishing and distribution. And a big part of that is the platform that you choose. So I know we had talked previously a little bit about platforms, and platforms are structured so they can automatically distribute your podcast out to other podcasting platforms, to YouTube, to Spotify, to Amazon, to, podcast, let's say network. I'm just making up names, but it does send it out automatically. So part of the way that I'm trying to prove is to, as soon as I get a show recorded, I'll start working on the editing. Once I have it edited and ready to go, I'll upload it into the platform and schedule it for release on the regular day that I normally release episodes, which is every Friday. And that way it's off my books. It's done. I can move on to the next one, and I think that's a big help, is being organized there. I know in PodMatch, they talk about workflows, and they have this kind of like a workbook, or not a workbook, or a worksheet of steps that you can go through. And I'm a pretty organized guy anyway, so I don't use it very much, but you could definitely use that to have all the check boxes. Okay, have you scheduled with your guest? Have you recorded the interview? Have you edited the interview? Have you put your intro and outro into the interview? Has it been uploaded to the platform? When is it scheduled to go out? Like all of those kinds of things, right? So you can have some structure. Like if you're not a organized kind of person, I would definitely recommend having some kind of worksheet to guide you and make sure that you don't miss anything, because it's really easy to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Any kind of tools like that, I think, is really helpful. I love that Alex, again, back to Alex, that he has that tool for the workflows that's available for free, actually, as well for people. They can go through podmatch.com and you can get that. But I just love that he offers these tools to help podcasters as well, even if you don't use PodMatch, which is another good sign of Alex as a person, right, and his team. I love that. The other thing, too, I think is just one of the reasons I think some people leave podcasting is they're not growing, right? They're excited, they do a few episodes, but they're not improving. They're not like getting feedback. They're not making their show better. They're not learning more about podcasting. So they kind of plateau. And when you start plateauing, you start to decline as well, because you're not making yourself better. You're not learning new ways of podcasting. You're not learning how to be better on the microphone. And you start declining. And then that decline is where people start losing interest because they're not seeing the results. So I'm always encourage people to learn more, grow, get in community like we talked about with other podcasters, get feedback, get somebody to listen to your show and offer some suggestions, to have you, Jonnie, listen to somebody's show, for example, and for you to come back and go, great, I would suggest that maybe this, and this will make your show better, right? Not that it's mandatory, but it's just an option. But it's another piece of feedback, another set of ears, another set of eyes looking at your podcast and giving you some thoughtful recommendations. I think that's going to make you better. And I think in that growth span, if we keep growing and growing, our podcast might last longer and longer. So if you're listening and you haven't had any kind of feedback like that, you can always reach out to Jonnie. I know he'd love to listen to your show, but get some feedback from a fellow podcaster that you admire, that you respect, and let them kind of help you shape your show. That's another way to grow and keep podcasting.
Absolutely. And I think when you talk about plateauing, it is definitely an issue in the podcasting world. As we talked about earlier, like there's a very small percentage of podcasters that are actually creating consistent content. And part of the issue with that is if you're too focused on metrics, you're too focused on growth, you have to stay true to your focus. You have to stay true to the message that you want to present through your particular podcast. And if that remains the real reason why you're podcasting, the metrics don't matter, because you're telling stories or you're creating content based on a particular area in life or history or whatever it might be. And as long as that passion remains in your heart, who cares about how many listeners you actually have? You know, I've read that it's almost like an exponential kind of thing. Like you may not see any growth at all for the longest time, but then all of a sudden, somebody will listen to your show and they go, man, like that's amazing. And they'll pass it on, and all of a sudden the way it goes, right? You know, I don't particularly look at the metrics that much. Every now and then I'll look and see you know, how many listeners or what countries we're in or stuff like that. But that's not what's important to me. It's whether the content that we're publishing is touching people's hearts. You know, and that's what makes the difference, right? And that's where you get your satisfaction. That's where you get your passion to stay in the fight. You know, so and as far as platform or plateauing goes, yeah, it's a risk, but you can break through that just by staying passionate about what you're feeling you're called to do.
Yeah, it's great. Jonnie, before we go, remind everybody again about your show. And I always like to ask this of my guests, co-hosts, when they come on. If I'm a new listener coming to your show, first time hearing your podcast, I've never heard it before. If there's a starting point, where should I start? The very beginning, way back at episode 1, like way in the early days, or the most recent? Where was a good place to start? Remind us again about your show.
Okay, so the podcast is called Refuge Freedom Stories, and it's stories about real lives changed by the power of God. Very inspirational, very personal stories people are willing to share. As far as which show to listen to, every show has a description. So it gives you like a little indication of what they're talking about. You know, we've had like Top Gun fighter pilots on the show. It's a crazy story, you know, incredible story. He's retired now, obviously, but a lot of fun. Jerry Werder is his name. But there's, you know, I think as you scroll through any podcast, whatever show it might be, yours, ours, you know, whatever, there should be a description there that allows you to get a sense of what the guest is talking about. So I wouldn't necessarily point to any single one show. I would just say scroll through the descriptions and you'll find something that kind of pricks your heart and says, well, maybe listen to this one. And I think if you're willing to give the podcast show an opportunity and listen to it, I think you'll see value in it. So.
Yeah, I like that. So Jonnie, any last parting words for a podcaster that may be struggling a little bit? They want to keep podcasting, but they're not seeing any kind of substantial feedback, or they don't feel like their audience is connected with them. It's a lot of silence, a lot of crickets when they release an episode. There's really no feedback, no emails, no voice messages. But they want to keep going. Anything they can do to help build their community?
I would say reach out to the podcasting community. There are, like, PodMatch isn't the only one. There's lots of, you can look online and you can find all kinds of podcasting communities to get involved in. Even do an online search for events that are coming up that we talked about earlier, to come and meet some other, like in real person, come and meet, someone standing there in front of you who's another podcaster that you can talk to, get some encouragement from that. Reach out to you, Dave. You've got a vast wealth of experience and knowledge to share with people. I think that would be really important if someone wants to grow themselves as a host, or even if they're a guest, if they're just listening and they say, hey, I want to be on shows, how can I do that? And I think just reach out to the podcasting community. Is a very welcoming community. And I don't think you would go wrong by reaching out in some way, shape, or form to anybody that you see that has a similar focus or similar interest, or something that you've listened to that just kind of, as you said, touched their heart. People are willing to help. It's a very welcoming and helpful, supporting community.
Excellent. Jonnie, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for sending me a shirt from your podcast.
Likewise.
I was showing it off to my wife. She's like, oh, I'm still stealing that from you. So now you've caused a fight between the two of us. So thank you for that. But thank you for sending me a shirt from your show. That was really kind.
I can send one for your wife too. Just send,
there you go. That'll solve our marital problems.
Yeah, send me her. Well, we don't want our show to cause marital problems, right?
No.
So send me her shirt size in an email, and I'll get one to you. Once the postal strike is over, I already have one shirt sitting here that I got to mail out that I can't do it. I told my guest the other day, I said, I'm going to have to wait till the postal strike's over. So
I love it. Everyone go support Jonnie and his podcast. He's a great guy. And like I said at the beginning, Jonnie Be Good. We have Jonnie Be Great. And he's a great person to talk to, a great person to be in community with. And I'd really love for you to go and check out his show and give him some feedback as well. Let him know you're listening to his podcast and which episode really stuck out to you as a listener. I'm sure he'd love to hear from you. Jonnie, thank you for doing what you do in this world. Thank you for showing up and really for demonstrating that integrity we talk about. You're a great example of that to me, Jonnie. So thank you for being you, and thank you for making time to be on the show as a guest co-host. Love having you here.
Likewise, it was a blast, and I'd love to do it again sometime. And God bless you for all you do.
Awesome. Well, keep the door wide open. You can come back anytime you want. Thanks, Sean.
Okay, take care.
Hey, thanks for listening to the podcast all the way through to the end. I love having these great guest co-hosts on the show to share their podcast with you. You have some homework to do. And what I'm asking of you is to go check out our featured guest co-host today. Go over and listen to their podcast. The links are always in the show notes. And I'd love for you to go and give them your love and support. And I think if we can all do that for each other, podcasting will be a lot more fun for all of us. So it's time to do what you've asked others to do for you. It's time to do for this guest co-host. Links in the show notes. Go over and check out their show and leave them a review. Do the follow. Go listen to their episodes in full, the entirety of an episode, which again shows to the apps that it's a good podcast because you're going there and you're staying to the end. It's probably one of the best ways you can help a podcaster grow their audience and be shown to more people is by simply going and listening wherever you listen to the very end, like you're doing right now here. This is the perfect way to signal to wherever you're listening on, this is a podcast worth promoting. And all of the apps want you to stay on as long as possible. So go over and listen to our guest co-host episode and leave them some feedback. If they have a Buy Me a Coffee, send them a coffee. If they have a speak pipe, send them a voice message. If they have an email, send them an email. If they're on Instagram, send them a direct message. Do something to support our guest co-hosts. They've given up their time to be here with you, to be here with me, and we can give that back to them with time and attention, our love, our support. Thank you for doing all that for me as well. Here on the How to Podcast series, we'll talk to you soon for our next episode.